listening to the debate the last couple of days, both inside and outside Parliament, regarding the IMF package, what appears is that the supporters of the IMF reform process seem to be asking the people of this country, as well as members of this Parliament, to choose between democracy and the economy. This is an extremely false distinction that is being made, as if somehow the economy is above everything else, and as if the economy and decisions about the economy are devoid of any kind of political significance or political meaning. And we are being constantly told that at this moment the economy has to take priority, and that suspending democratic freedoms, democratic privileges is almost essential in order for these economic reforms that are being proposed to take place. This is an extremely dangerous precedent, an extremely dangerous approach that is being currently proposed. Implicit within this approach is a deep sense of elitism and arrogance, where the rulers of this country assume that they know best, that they know what is best for the people of this country. That people of this country are ignorant, that people of this country are unable to make choices and decisions on their behalf, keeping in mind what is in their best interest, and that the rulers somehow have to take on the power to make these decisions on behalf of the people of this country. This, as you know, is completely anti-democratic, and even within the proposed economic reforms, an extremely dangerous approach to take. Within the IMF package, there are deep structural reforms that are being proposed, which need to be discussed, which need the people's consent, which needs people's mandate in order to be effectively implemented, if at all. For instance, there are tax reforms that are being proposed, which affect different layers of different layers of the society in different ways. Controversial schemes of privatization, sale of national resources, spending cuts, reforms to social protection are being proposed. Under the reforms to social protection, the ways in which the poor are being identified, the poor are categorized. There are reforms that are proposed. There are new measures, new criteria that is being introduced, over which people have had very little prior information, where the basic understanding seems to be that people will lie in order to get benefits, and that people will manipulate the system in order to get benefits, completely ignoring the role of the political authority in politicizing these kinds of systems for their own political benefits. Spending cuts are also being proposed for long cherished institutions in this country, such as health and education. In the education sector today, without any kind of policy discussion, without any kind of written directives, already courses such as the engineering course offered by the Katunayaka Engineering Institute, as well as other programs offered, for instance, by the Vocational Training Authority, by NITA, now are being advertised for course fees that have been arbitrarily decided without any kind of policy directive. None of these policies, none of these directives, none of these measures have been available for the public to discuss, to comment on, let alone the public, not even for members of the Parliament. So what we also need to keep in mind is that this government does not have a mandate, this president does not have a mandate to implement the kinds of reforms that are being proposed. That is why ensuring the democratic freedoms that are available in our Constitution, the democratic privileges enshrined in our Constitution, have to be upheld at this moment, because what the government is proposing, what the government is implementing, is starkly different, is diametrically different to the mandate on which this government was elected. This government was elected on a platform that is drastically different to what is being proposed. This government was elected with a leader who was brought into power in a way in which he was contrasted with the current president, and where the current president was categorized by the SLPP as the person responsible for the crisis in the country. Today, they are singing hosannas in praise of that very same person who they held responsible for the crisis in this country. So, when the strategies of the government, when the approach of a government changes so drastically, don't the people of this country have a right to also express their views on the on the extremely different and the diametrically opposed reforms which the government they elected is now planning to implement? There are lessons from history, there are global lessons about the dangers of imposing and forcing.
Honourable Member, you have another 2 minutes.
Thank you. About what happens when these kinds of reforms, when these kinds of initiatives, policy initiatives, are imposed by force on people. There are plenty of examples from around the world about the social and political unrest that is generated, that is created when these kinds of reforms are imposed on people without their consent. We have seen countries which have faced similar economic crises, similar economic turmoil for years, for decades, having to deal with political turmoil because of the way in which these kinds of structural reforms are imposed. That is why it is essential that when countries are proposing these kinds of deep structural reforms that are necessary to get us out of the kind of political and economic crisis that we are facing, that they come with people's consent, that they are supported by a people's mandate. Rulers who think that they can...
Honourable Member, your time's up.
Yeah, I'll conclude. Rulers who think that they are above the people, rulers who seem to think that they can impose their will on people arbitrarily, very soon will realize that the public view, that the public court is much more powerful than the will of a few arrogant and elitist rulers. So in that sense, at this moment, anyone who wishes well for this country, anyone who has the best interests of the people of this country, will need to ensure that the democratic freedoms, democratic privileges that are enshrined in our Constitution are at least as equally important as the economic reforms that are being proposed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
You're watching the Lifetraveler channel.